Well, how do we think? We'll just start from there. Since the beginnings of the modern age, Copernicus, Descartes, Galileo, Newton, etc., we've lived in a world of decentered human beings. We've been decentered from our home on Earth, and we've been decentered from ourselves. We're really adrift. Newton finally set us adrift in homogeneous space, considered as a kind of container. And in this world, following Descartes, mind is separated from body, human beings are separate from nature, and not to mention from each other and the divine. And it's a world that we live in today, which is the world of the global economics that we've been talking about, of sheer, potentially endless, but in fact, of course, limited, linear quantity, ruled predominantly by mechanistic cause and effect, in which power is quantitatively determined and defined, and domination and control of quantity in any field is synonymous with success. So what we see in all our views of the world is sort of egotism writ large. From Darwinism to economics, it's a question of survival, scarcity, and the application of purposive force to fulfill our will. This is to say that quote-unquote scientific thinking altogether has become technological thinking. We're no longer interested in our own transformation and improvement as human beings for millennia have been, but only in the transformation of the known, which is the world projected in our image, technological image. Nature, economy, is objectified as a fixed, self-contained sort of spatio-mechanical system whose parts operate according to statistical, mathematical laws. And this so-called scientific picture of the world determines all our worldviews. So that we get a psychology, for instance, without a psyche, and an economy without an eco, or household, or community, in which money is an abstract, meaningless medium of material exchange, in which, like Teflon atoms, faceless human beings pass each other like glowing stars in empty space. Now, it wasn't always this way. For millennia, it was different. Ancient humanity sought something quite different. That is, that there are different ways of looking at the world. Rather than the objectification and control of the known, that's the other object, by the knower, by the ego individual, they always sought unity, identity, and above all, relation. And they sought to, in their interactions, they sought to transform themselves, not the world. Although they didn't actually separate these. And this is the way humanity saw itself participating in this greater cosmic world, which reached to the stars and encompassed visible and invisible realms. And they saw the purpose of life as this continuous coming into unity of the whole. And they understood that we had fallen into fragmentation, into ignorance and separation, but they also understood that through our efforts we could come into unity again. And this view was founded on the primacy of humanity as life and consciousness, not matter. On spiritual values. That is to say that early human beings, finding themselves separated and cut off, but bearing within themselves the memory of the original unity, sought through their relationships with each other and nature and the invisible worlds to bring the whole back into unity. And to do so, essentially, They sought to realize the sacramental nature of life itself. And life they understood as cyclical, rhythmic, as time. While we live predominantly in space, all our understanding of the world is spatial. We can't understand something unless it's spatialized on a blackboard or in flowcharts. For millennia, human beings lived in time, and they understood economy and human life as an embodiment of time. And this view continued right up to the edge of the modern world. An example that just came to me recently, but it's a very interesting one, is that, the alchemists of the Middle Ages would always say that the key to their work, the great matter, was everywhere to be found, because people, what do you really work with? It's everywhere to be found, they said, and people despise it and ignore it and don't know that it's there. Now, nobody quite knows what they were referring to, but in fact, they could have been referring to rhythm. Rhythm, to time, to the peculiar power of rhythmic phenomena, and experiencing relationships and the world in terms of organic, cyclical, periodic wholes, rather than linear, short-term, cut off things. And in fact, it's true. Of course, we're surrounded by rhythm. All natural phenomena, from the smallest microorganisms to the galaxies, are rhythmic, and we ourselves are rhythmic beings. Body clocks and the Chinese body clock of Chinese medicine, where the energy flows through the different organs through the 24-hour day. And in fact, the more closely we examine the phenomena around us, it's difficult to find anything that is not rhythmic. And in fact, what is not rhythmic is dead. On the other hand, to infuse something with rhythm is actually to make it alive. And this, I suddenly understood, this is in homeopathy. I don't know if you're familiar with homeopathic medicine or homeopathy, which goes to these incredibly small dilutions. And the process is by dilution and succussion, or shaking, or infusing with rhythm. And in fact, what happens in the homeopathy is that the substance in the homeopathic remedy is spiritualized by this rhythmic infusion. Now, that's just a metaphor for the fact that rhythm and the living in accord with rhythms brings life and spirituality into whatever it is one does. Rhythm spiritualizes. And yet we live cut off from time, and we live cut off from its rhythms. And this you can see coming through the, from Copernicus on, we've lost all sense of cyclical activity, and we don't see things in wholes, which are temporal. We've lost time's wholeness, in which everything is interconnected, and every part is connected to every other part. It's what's called recursive. And all that we've left with is this kind of spatial way of thinking. And the earth, like a speck of dust within it, and as Pascal said, the silence of these infinite spaces terrifies me. And that was 400 or 500 years ago, and I think the situation has got only more dire. Now, for ancient humanity, economics, culture, religion, the human self-understanding began with these rhythmic phenomena. Lots of getting out of order here, sorry. Rhythmic phenomena. Ancient human beings were rhythmic, time-based peoples. They understood time as a process of qualities, differentiated time, diversified time. Their feet were on the ground, they stood on the earth, the sky moved over their heads. Plato called the cosmos this great animal, this living being. The object of human life was to bring oneself into harmony with these greater rhythms. And this notion, which was then embodied in the smallest human interactions, was the basis of religion, government, economy, ordinary life. Everything was rhythm. Going into this because it's very useful to have a completely different view before we start looking at how economies unfolded. Obviously, these were agrarian peoples. They were not urban. Being urban, we lose this sense of contact with these heavenly and earthly rhythms within which human life unfolds. Human life unfolds as day follows night, night follows day. The days shorten and lengthen as the sun ascends and descends, moving west. The sun and moon set, shifting from east to west across the horizon. All this, the great canopy of the stars shifts. All this has its effect on plants as well as on the whole terrestrial crust. The whole earth lives in this infusion of time and rhythms. And the earth is fecundating, abundant. There's absolutely no scarcity. As Bernard says, this is the mother of abundance. As it becomes receptive to this cyclicity. And from this understanding, the ancients got the idea that time really was always cyclical. Time was genesis. It was the full cycle of becoming, from seed through germination, through flower, fruit, back to seed. This was a cycle. And although each time it had happened a million times before, each time was different. And human life was the attunement to these fundamental rhythms. And that's how economy began, out of this understanding. Every economy flowed through the calendar, in other words. Individual times were harmonized with great times. The people and all human interactions were integrated into this sense of time. Poetry, music, theater, all the arts, as well as all the human interactions, were connected with these sources of human rhythm. So that's the background. Well, it really goes up to about the invention of coinage as we know it was in the 7th century BC in Lydia. I mean, there were other forms of monetary, shell, cowries, and there were other forms of things, but actual
money as we know it. So it really, until basically until, indigenous people still live like this. But in our Western evolution, it faded with Egypt, though of course, the Christian, the speaker before mentioned what this was in the Christian calendar, but the sacred year went through the Middle Ages with books of hours where human labors for the different seasons were integrated with prayer and everything else. So it continued, but it ceased to be really dominant, in about the birth of the Greco-Roman period. Now, almost offhandedly, I called this talk "Spiritual Metaphors for Money." And having started with this little thing on time, this is going to jump around, I'm afraid. Language is not a bad place to also look at, before we go into the details of economy, to think about money. Now, in fact, metaphor is a Greek word which means to transfer, metaphorein, to transfer, to carry over. And in fact, according to Aristotle, metaphor is reciprocal exchange between two things of the same kind. And the word Aristotle uses for exchange, apodimony, actually means to give back, render, exchange, or sell. So implicitly, a lot of Aristotle was thinking of language and economics as very closely related. He also speaks of the logos or ratio, which also means the rate of exchange between two words. And densifying this connection between language and money, the word for interpret, hermeneus, hermeneutics, can also mean broker between two parties. And logos or ratio, which can mean the word, as in the beginning was the word, can also mean account, as many other things.
So rationalization is ratio?
Ratio, well, that's from reason, which proportion. Ratio is also proportion. Yeah.
As an account.
Counting. Right. Absolutely, yeah. And nomizein, to coin, which is the Greek word to coin, can mean to strike a coin or coin a phrase. And of course, our numisma, the actual coin, which we've on Bernard's definition, means an agreement. It means consensus in Greek. But agreement is a linguistic relational phenomenon. So that in some sense, language, money speaks in a different way than we usually think of it. It's a kind of language because it mediates relations, obviously. But that language, as the money language, like our spoken language, is increasingly reduced to its minimum because in of course, thinking in money, all qualities. Language is actually about qualities, but we've reduced money to quantity alone, as we are increasingly reducing language to information. And it's in order to see the possibilities, we have to get rid of certain misconceptions we have about language. We think of language on this sort of sender-receiver message model. And that the message somehow refers to something out there. That the primary function of language is denotation, to point to things. But actually, language is a whole universe in which we live, and it's a sort of endless knot consisting of communication, relationship, communion, and meaning. Living in language, we communicate about our relationships while sharing in meaning, actually communing in meaning, because if there is a meaning and we both share in it, that's one meaning, and we are united in that. That is to say that language is primarily connotative rather than denotative. It doesn't point, it creates a vessel of meanings and relationships. And rather than communicating information, the informational content is very, very secondary, as anybody who is a therapist or a lover knows. But in anybody who's been in a very exciting conversation, it's not the information, it's all the other stuff that's going on. And of these four things that make up language, communication, communion, relationship, and meaning, it's difficult to say which is primary. But coming out of this Bateson tradition, I would think that relationship is primary. And Bateson said that the relationship creates the relata, right? I.e., it's not you and I, and then we create a relationship. There is a relationship, and as that lives, we emerge. And language emerges out of that speech, because who speaks? If you're in a conversation, who's speaking? Sometimes you can't tell who had a thought. And it's fundamental to think through the philosophical basis of economy, to recognize that human beings are primarily relating beings, and that what really feeds us is relating and relationship. Spiritually, it's always said that the earth, we're incarnate in order to create and engage and to relate to each other. Those traditions that speak of the spiritual worlds, and that you don't make any new relationships in the spiritual worlds. This is the place, and that's the purpose of life on earth. And to serve that purpose, we have economies.
Did you say economists?
Economies, right. And I'm not, I would leave it up to, in the conversation, how we apply all this. But it's also very important to recognize that in any communication, in language, perhaps the most important level of that communication is about the relationship. About our relationship. We have a sort of information level, and there's all the other levels, but then the real level that counts is about our relationship. And we should also note that communication, relationship, language, of course, are not linear, but have a endlessly cyclical life of their own. And it's always reciprocal. And it's very difficult in, one of the tasks, it's very difficult if you're trying to transcribe a dialogue and then give an extract of it, say, to make some point. You'll find that it's extraordinarily difficult to draw boundaries around speech. And these are all questions that come up when thinking about economies, as we'll see. So, economics, as I said, began, which the word we get from Aristotle, or Greek, in the 6th century with the introduction of coinage. and the philosophy. But the word actually itself, and when Aristotle is talking about it, refers back to pre-monetary economies. Because, of course, there have been, as we know, and millennia of economies without money. And before money, many complex societies, very socially and complex societies with a large cultural capital, existed without money and ordered their economic lives to a significant extent. Organized their lives without money, but of course through exchange, because exchange is the coin of relationship, and different kinds of exchange. I'm sure you all know all this, but there's Karl Polanyi wrote very well on primitive and so-called primitive and archaic and non-monetary economies. Pardon?
Tacit.
No, Michael Polanyi wrote. Karl was tacit knowing, and they were a great Viennese intellectual family, like the Huxleys or the Batesons, and Karl was the economist. And he wrote a book called The Great Transformation, and he's probably one of the best early critics of the dominance of the market and of the misunderstanding of the nature of economy, actually. But essentially, most of these early economies were gift economies, or based on gift exchange. And the other important point is that they were all embedded economies. Because when we're talking about the global economy, this is an abstraction that sits over our heads. But these earlier economies and the economies that we strive to go towards are embedded. They're embodied and embedded in social, interpersonal, ongoing relations, non-economic relations, quotes unquotes, like friendship, hospitality, kinship, marriage, all those kinds of things. The articulation of these relationships creates economy. The economy, the gift, the distribution and reciprocity, all the sustenance of life comes out of the actual lived relational fabric of the community. It's not imposed on it. It just articulates it, and it becomes ritualized in some sense. So there are formal, not laws, but there's a tradition. They become habitual ways of doing it. And it also, remember that as it's impossible not to communicate, so it's impossible not to relate. So that within these economies, that is to say, it's impossible for exchanges not to take place. So that in some sense, in these early agrarian-based household-type economies, it's very difficult to say what was not economic. Put another way, the foundation of these earlier economies is such that they articulate, process, and express the values implicit in the human relationships that make up the community. And then the community was, of course, these were spiritual, religious-based cultures, so these values were also the values in the cosmos and in the invisible worlds and spiritual worlds. This is to say that in those days, the economy not only included the exchange of stuff, i.e. Goods, but also religion, the arts, what we would now call the arts. Drama, poetry, language itself. All these were quotes unquote currency, and fashioned and worked to ensure the stability and health of the social organism. And these went on for millennia. For instance, praise. There's a wonderful study of the Greek poet Pindar. Pindar's odes. He was 6th century BC, and it shows how these odes, how praise functioned as a currency in this quotes archaic society. So that exchange went far beyond what we think of as economic and included all exchanges and negotiations. Now, giving was the fundamental gesture was that of giving rather than taking. And it was giving that was felt to knit together the community. This all goes back to Marcel Mauss, the anthropologist, and he wrote a book called The Gift, and then the essay on the gift, and the research has gone on further into that field. But there's a beautiful New Caledonia proverb that says that our feasts are the movement of a needle that sews together the parts of our reed roofs, making of these a single roof, one word. And that it's that kind of ethos that still continues in Bali, as Bernard was talking about. Now, the three obligations of the gift were primarily to give, but also to receive, and then to repay. Thus, the gift, in a gift economy, the gift has an economic and a spiritual content because it's personal and reciprocal. It depends on a relationship that endures over time, and in fact can, take years before the cycle is concluded. So it's not like our current system, which is impersonal, abstract, and that there's no relationship. The relationship stops at the transfer of currency. This was the currency kept moving. Now, there's several words from Greece that I love to just say a few words about because they also speak to the larger thing. One was xenia, X-E-N-A, X-E-N-I-A, which is the word that's usually translated hospitality or guest friendship. But actually it's a reversible word. It's a word that means both guest and host and stranger and friend. That is to say that this economy depended on the fact that the uninvited was always welcome as the guest, and that hospitality, this the other side of giving, was this always this perpetual openness and availability to receive, that every stranger was welcomed as a guest, whether from their world or another. And in fact, it could be even from we'll get into this in a minute, but in some cultures, the other was actually received as from another world, as one of the dead. Because there was this fundamental basis of the economy was this openness to the stranger. This is not tolerance in the Christian sense. This is this continuous, this availability to the other. And the understanding that hospitality in this sense was what ensured harmonious relationships. And in our time of gross dislocation of peoples and refugees and the whole problems of immigration, it's probably a good idea to think into our economies a sense of hospitality to the stranger.
Like the priest in Les Mis.
Pardon?
The priest in Les Miserables.
Right.
I mean, he just blew all of our standards. Oh, you forgot to take the candlesticks I gave you.
All right.
We have about 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, well, I've only got 10 minutes. I'm going to... So, another word like xenia, interestingly enough, is the word what becomes our word for grace. It's also semantically reversible. It means a goodwill given or a payment received. It's the same word for whether you give or receive.
Which word is that?
Charis,
Charis.
which is grace. Grace, as in full of grace and truth and grace.
Caritas.
Caritas is love, right. Okay, jumping right quickly ahead to cover the points that I was going to cover. First, it's very interesting to note that invention of coinage, new kind of wealth, move from the oikos, from which we get the word economy, to the polis. And at the very beginning, the first person to write about this is Aristotle in his Politics and Nicomachean Ethics. And if you're interested, you should read chapter 5 of the Nicomachean Ethics and the first chapter of the Politics. Because Aristotle saw the problems right away. And he saw that the fundamental task was going to be to protect the economy from the polis. The economy, the household from the polis. And from the city, from the larger, from the global. He understood that economics, that is the management of the household, which ensured the sustenance and maintenance of the community, was different to politics. And that the head of the polis, that's the global, the city, should not try to manage the economy of the households, which should, that the household, the economy, that's the local, should enjoy autonomy. And he tried to safeguard production for use against production for gain, and thought that that would be possible so long as the global was actually accessory to the local. And that's what would ensure this. And right away he saw the problems involved with interest. With the whole problem of interest. So in the last, I misjudged the time. In the last few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about Rudolf Steiner's approach to contemporary economics. First, I think it's also, before I get there, it's really important. Polanyi has this very interesting list, because all the stuff that we're told about by the big economists about what is natural to human beings, he shows is not. It's not natural to, motive of gain or profit is not natural to human beings. For millennia, people did without it. To expect payment for labor is not natural for human beings. Nowhere in indigenous or uninfluenced society do we find the expectation of being paid for labor. To restrict labor is not natural. People love to work. The usual incentive to labor is not gain, but reciprocity and joy in the work. And in embedded economic systems, the distribution of goods is ensured by non-economic motives, i.e. non-profit motives. Individual food collection, etc., plays no part in any of these prior economies. Anyway, so now we move to the market economy. And Rudolf Steiner, who was do you all know who Rudolf Steiner was? Yeah. Anyway, Rudolf Steiner was another of these figures faced with the economic collapse at the end of the First World War. He felt that the spatial thinking, as I was talking about it before, was not adequate to understand the economic reality. His view of economics arose out of the nature of the human being and what constitutes human life, consciousness, and who or what is a human being. He felt that the only way to ensure the proper functioning of the economy proper was to separate economics from the legal sphere, the sphere of rights, and the cultural or spiritual sphere. He took the French Revolutionary motto of liberty, fraternity, égalité, to freedom in the cultural sphere, equality in the legal sphere, and brotherhood, sisterhood, association, relationship in the economic sphere. He foresaw in all spheres, but particularly in economics, that the greatest evil we had to overcome was egotism. But in all spheres, egotism was to be overcome. He gave a set of economics lectures in 1922 to economists, in which he makes all sorts of very interesting and thought-provoking and observations about the growth of the free market economy and the kind of thinking that really we are going to need to get out of it. Now, the one thing he stressed absolutely is that to understand economics, and this gets us back to where we began, we have to begin to be able to think with incredible flexibility, mobility, and dynamism. All aspects of economic life, value, price, consumption, demand, all money itself, are continuously in flow. They continuously circulate and they are continuously changing. So that any kind of fixed understanding, static understanding, really creates enormous problems that then threaten to bring the whole system down. And this is, of course, true of all living systems, because he continually stresses that the economy is a living system, an organism. Now, he says a number of very interesting things about money. money for Steiner, currency, receives its value by the process of circulation. It's a medium of exchange, as we've mentioned. Basically, he proposes a bookkeeping or clearing model. But what he stresses, which I think is very important and goes back to some of these other ideas that I was talking about, is that in the course of circulation, money changes, that not all money is the same. And he distinguishes between purchase or exchange money, gift money, and loan money or working capital. And these are three different values. Now, purchase money is clearly based on its exchange value, but loan money depends on the intelligence behind it. Whereas gift money, according to Steiner, allows money to keep flowing rather than aging, stagnating, or becoming dammed up. Interestingly enough, he was very insistent that loan money not become purchase money, but become gift money. And for Steiner, the economic problems arise when money stops flowing, when money is stored or gets otherwise dammed up. So he speaks of money stagnating, or even the smell of old money. And he even felt that money ages, and in fact money should be given a lifespan, as in a scrip. That money should be time-bound. Now, Steiner's economics, we don't have much, is called, either just called Economics, there are two editions out, or one's called World Economics. And it's some of it in its examples are dated, but the kind of thinking that he proposes is very relevant to where we are today. And actually, it goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning about embedded economies. Because Steiner's approach is essentially phenomenological. So he really looks at what kinds of relations are ongoing. And from these relations, what is the way to articulate and keep the whole system flowing. So his question is, how do we find ways for our economic realities to incarnate, that is, to allow us to embody our social and spiritual values rather than for us to become a mere cog in some abstract economic wheel. So, then I rushed to the very end, and I had some questions for us to talk about. Based on these remarks and what we've been talking about here, and I'll just end with those that you could take away. Because this question came to me, is there any exchange that is not economic, that doesn't contribute to the life of the community? Now, would it be possible in any of our communities to inventory the exchanges that make up a community and to see how they contribute to it? From the perspective of the evolution of consciousness, and it's interesting that the Gandhian approach is the same, that all economics has to start from the bottom, that is the individual. And how do we actually do that? The question came up earlier that, so many of our alternative currencies address really middle-class communities. And whereas in fact, the poorer the community, the more it needs it and is ready for it. But we have to somehow be able to communicate the way in which it starts from, each person. And how do we integrate spiritual and economic values? And finally, on thinking through Rudolf Steiner's clear demarcation of these three kinds of money: gift, loan, and exchange, purchase. How many different kinds of money, or what different functions, forms does money have, and what kinds of exchange systems would we have within them if we could realize the relational economic contribution of everybody in the community? Because you can't, and if you have, they're not all carpenters and, but everybody has something to offer, and in fact everybody is offering, each contribution makes up the whole, and the community becomes is able to flower to the extent that each contribution is able to make its contribution in a reciprocated way. So I don't know if there's any question. I mean, I don't know what the time was now. We're finished?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't organize my time better.
It was wonderful.
Yeah. I got a few catalogs here if anybody's interested, and there are more outside on the table.
Was it Lindisfarne once?
Oh yes, I remember you.
How's Bill?
Bill is, well, he's all right. Where are you?
I'm